Imagine waking up and realizing your property's been hijacked. Quietly, boldly, and with zip-tied arrogance. No fight, no warning, just a fresh, steel gate across your only access road, padlocked like it belonged in Fort Knox, and a sign bolted to the top that read, "Property of Cedar Hollow, HOA." Problem is, I'm not part of Cedar Hollow. Never signed anything, never paid dues, never asked them for a thing. But apparently someone over there thought they could lay claim to my land like it was the last slice of pie at a church picnic. That was 3 months ago. What they didn't know? I'd been planning for this for 5 years. That gate wasn't a blockade. It was a signal. And the second they installed it, they walked right into my trap like raccoons in a cookie jar. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. I seriously love seeing where the smart, no-nonsense folks are tuning in. If wild stories with real tension, poetic justice, and just the right splash of HOA insanity are your thing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story? Even juicier, and trust me, the next twist? Let's just say you'll want front row seats. My name's Ben Carter. I'm a 39-year-old former cybersecurity engineer who traded code for quiet. After 2 decades of server rooms, bad coffee, and corporate nonsense, I bought 5 acres of undeveloped land outside San Diego. No HOA, no shared fences, just space, sky, and a whole lot of peace. I had a vision: build a smart, sustainable home with my own hands, and finally live somewhere I couldn't hear my neighbors sneeze through the walls. The land hugged up against Cedar Hollow, a high-end neighborhood with gates, gossip, and more rules than a boarding school. I figured if I minded my business, they'd mind theirs. Turns out I figured wrong. The HOA queen herself, Marjorie Langford, had been watching my lot like a hawk with a law degree. Old money, older grudges, and a backyard view that apparently wasn't complete unless it included my land. Marjorie ran Cedar Hollow like it was her inheritance, and everyone else was renting her grace. She was 60, sharp-tongued, and had that smile that said, "Bless your heart," while her lawyers sharpened knives. Her inner circle included Eldon Price, a retired attorney who specialized in passive-aggressive nodding, and Tina Moss, a real estate agent who could sell you your own shoes if you weren't paying attention. When I bought the land, I got a friendly invitation to an HOA meeting about boundary harmony. I declined. Politely. That's when things turned. Suddenly, I was drowning in violation notices. One said I had unauthorized dirt. Another claimed I was disrupting the aesthetic continuity of the neighborhood. I hadn't even broken ground yet. These people were fighting imaginary crimes on land they didn't own. It was like getting ticketed for parking in your own garage. But here's where it gets good. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I smiled, because I saw it coming. See, I don't just build firewalls, I build contingencies. While they were busy filing bogus complaints, I was combing through dusty property maps, scanning survey records, and finding things they'd forgotten. Like a 1956 public access route that cuts across the east side of my land, still legally open, still mine to use. But I didn't mention that. Not yet. I needed Marjorie to show her hand, so I played the role. Frustrated new guy stuck in permit limbo looking for a way out. And while she leaned in with threats and lowball offers, I quietly started building something else entirely. A legal and digital mousetrap with her name on it. Hidden cameras. Documented harassment. A timeline of her every misstep dressed in HOA letterhead and smug assumptions. So when that gate finally showed up, I wasn't mad. I was ready. That gate was my green light. My confirmation that Marjorie and her minions had crossed from petty into prosecutable. They thought they'd boxed me in, but what they didn't know was I'd already unlocked the back door, and I wasn't the one trapped. They were. One by one. On camera. On record. Every move they made from that point on was evidence, and what started as a turf war over my land was about to become the kind of lawsuit HOA legends are made of. But first I played dumb. I called the cops. filed the report, acted confused. How could this happen, I asked, while my cameras caught everything from 6 different angles. That was day 1 of the end, for them, and just the beginning of this story. So before we go on, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who else has danced with the petty HOA dragon, because if you've been through it, you already know sometimes peace isn't given. It's planned, earned, and documented. Every HOA has a queen bee. Mine came with a private legal team, a 2-inch pearl necklace, and a god complex large enough to zone commercial. Marjorie Langford wasn't just president of the Cedar Hollow HOA, she was the HOA. The bylaws bent around her like sunlight on a solar panel. 60, sharp as a gavel, and always 3 steps overdressed, she looked like the type who called her gardener by his full name and used it as a verb. Her late husband had been a real estate tycoon, which made her HOA royalty. You could feel her presence before she walked into a room, mostly because a silence would hit like a fog bank. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that made you check your emails for lawsuits you didn't remember getting. From the moment I'd bought my land, I could feel her watching me, like I was a scratch on her champagne glass. He hadn't even poured the foundation yet, but she was already drafting my eviction notice in her head. Marjorie didn't operate solo, of course. No self-crowned monarch does. She had her court. First, there was Eldon Price, retired attorney, 67, soft-spoken and built like a dusty bookshelf. You'd barely notice him until he quietly handed you a letter that could ruin your week. Eldon was the kind of man who never raised his voice, but somehow still made you feel like you were losing a custody battle. Then came Tina Moss, the HOA secretary and local real estate agent. She was ambitious, 43, and always wore stilettos like she was walking over competition. She wasn't evil, exactly. More like ethically flexible. The kind of person who'd nod through a lie if it helped her listing commission. Together, the 3 of them ran Cedar Hollow like a velvet-wrapped vice grip. Friendly on the outside, crushing on the inside. And I was the next thing they wanted to squeeze. It started with a letter. Dear Mr. Carter, we'd love for you to join us for a brief conversation regarding boundary harmony. Boundary harmony? That's the HOA version of we're about to make your life a legal swamp. I knew the trick. Get me to attend, pretend I'm under their jurisdiction, then slowly twist the screws. I declined, politely but firmly. Told them I wasn't part of Cedar Hollow, didn't sign any covenants, and had no interest in harmonizing anything. That's when they dropped the silk gloves and came at me with brass knuckles. Overnight, I was hit with violations. One said my natural brush was a fire hazard. Another claimed unauthorized excavation, which was impressive since the only thing I'd dug was a hole for my mailbox. Permit requests started disappearing like socks in a dryer. And every time I called the county for clarification, I was met with a new delay and a new excuse. It was like trying to get a straight answer from a vending machine that just ate your dollar. The real kicker? They claimed they wanted the land for a community garden. Isn't that sweet? Marjorie in pearls, planting kale with the neighbors. Except it was nonsense. I wasn't born yesterday, and even if I had been, I'd still know a development scam when I smelled one. Marjorie's husband, God rest his morally flexible soul, had once floated a luxury resort plan on that exact hilltop before the deal fell through. And guess what? My land just happened to sit on the key access point to that ocean view. Without it, the project was dead in the water. The community garden was just a cover story. What they really wanted was control, because control leads to permits, and permits lead to profit. My profit, my view, my problem. And the fact that I stood in the way, to Marjorie, that wasn't just business. That was personal. That was war. But here's the part they didn't see coming. I may have been the outsider, but I knew the rule book better than they did. That's the thing about tech guys. We read the fine print while everyone else is still looking for the Wi-Fi password. I didn't yell. I documented. I didn't retaliate. I researched. While Marjorie and her clique played HOA Monopoly, I started mapping out the legal chessboard. I dug up land deeds older than their bylaw. I found loopholes, easements, and county decisions they conveniently ignored. And most importantly, I kept smiling. Because nothing terrifies a bully like someone who isn't panicking. So while they thought they were pressing me into a corner, I was building exits in every direction. This wasn't me losing control. It was me watching them hand over the rope, one bogus notice at a time. And just like that, the queen had made her first mistake. She assumed I was like the last guy who owned this land, someone she quietly pressured into selling for a song. But I don't sell my future at a discount just because someone in a linen blazer tells me to. I saw what was coming. I let it come. Because the truth is, there's something deeply satisfying about letting someone dig their own hole, especially when you already know where the shovel is buried. And trust me, the next move they made, it was the one that changed everything. If Marjorie wanted war, she picked the wrong nerd. See, most people panic when the HOA comes knocking with threats and citations. Me? I start a file. I don't mean a file folder. I mean a digitally organized, time-stamped, geotagged library of every move they make. And that smug little gate they installed? That was the permission slip I needed to shift into Phase 2. I didn't yell. I didn't sue. I opened my laptop and started mapping my options. And that's when I found it, buried in an old land use archive from 1956. A narrow public access road, never officially closed, cutting across the eastern edge of my property. Forgotten by time, ignored by Cedar Hollow, but legally alive. They thought they had me boxed in. What they didn't know? I had just discovered my tunnel. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I did go to college with one, Ava Lynn, sharp as a scalpel, meaner than a broken contract, and allergic to injustice. She's the kind of person who once argued with a parking meter and won. I sent her what I'd found, and within 24 hours, she was calling me like a kid on Christmas morning. "Ben, this road is gold," she said. "It's dusty, but it's legit. And if you play this right, they won't just lose control, they'll lose credibility." So we started comparing notes. Turns out Cedar Hollow had a history. This wasn't Marjorie's first dance. She'd pushed out 2 other landowners in the last decade, using the same playbook. Drown them in bureaucracy, let frustration do the rest, then buy the land at a gracious discount. Slow suffocation disguised as neighborhood concern. But I wasn't about to be her third win. I was going to be her final mistake. I kept up appearances, responded to their violation letters with fake confusion and long delays. "I wasn't aware, thank you for letting me know," I'd write while copying Ava and my folder of evidence on every reply. But behind the scenes, the real work had begun. At night, I started clearing that old road, hacked through brush and overgrowth like I was reclaiming a ghost town. I hired Cam, a contractor I trusted from a past job, ex-military, quiet, discreet, and the kind of guy who understood phrases like "no paper trail" without blinking. Cam brought in a crew, tight-knit, no questions. They operated like ghosts, only showing up after dark, clearing the path inch by inch while Marjorie's world stayed blissfully unaware. Meanwhile, I made sure all the noise stayed where they expected it, at the fake entrance, the one they'd blocked. That gate? It wasn't just a prop. It was my honeypot. I embedded cameras into the posts, motion sensors in the brush, even wired the hinges to send pings every time they were touched. The system was smarter than most people's homes. Audio, video, timestamps, cloud backups. Every time someone from the HOA so much as looked at that gate sideways, I had it on record. Setting this trap was like coding a virus to eat itself. They thought they were in control, but every smug visit, every whispered conversation at the edge of my land was building my case like an invisible prosecutor. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was building the narrative. And best of all, they were writing it for me. Now here's where things get satisfying. The more I acted frustrated and defeated, the more confident they became. Marjorie sent me another friendly letter asking if I'd reconsider selling. Eldon dropped off an envelope labeled Property Access Proposal, like I didn't know what that really meant. And Tina? She had the nerve to stop me in town and say this whole situation would go away if you just joined the community. I nodded, smiled, played dumb. Let them believe I was still in the dark, still stuck, still negotiating. Meanwhile, my secret road was almost cleared. My cameras were live, my lawyer was prepping, and my contractors were ready. They thought they had the upper hand, but the only thing they were holding was a grenade, with a timer they didn't see ticking. And I couldn't wait for them to pull the pin. Because the next move they made, the one they thought would seal my fate, was exactly the one I'd been waiting for. And when it came, oh, it wasn't just about land anymore. It was about exposing an entire machine built on power, pressure, and the assumption that no one would ever fight back. But they hadn't counted on me. They hadn't counted on the nerd with the blueprint. And the trap? It was about to spring wide open. Stay with me, because this next part, that's when things really explode. She didn't know the gate was the cheese, and she was the mouse. 3 days after I cleared the last branch on the old public access road, Marjorie made her big move. I pulled up to my land like any other morning, coffee in hand, only to find a brand new industrial-grade metal gate blocking the original entrance. It had the HOA's seal bolted onto the bars like it was some kind of territorial branding. Below that, a shiny plaque, Property of Cedar Hollow HOA. Oh, they went full drama. They even left a packet of papers in a plastic sleeve with HOA letterhead trying to sound official. What they didn't realize was every bolt they drilled into that gate, every smug line they wrote, it was all being recorded from 3 angles in HD with synced audio. I didn't get mad. I got footage. They followed it up with what they thought was a power move, filing an ownership claim with the county that suggested boundary overlap due to an old plat map. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked halfway legit, but I had the original surveys, title, insurance, and a recent digital scan that put that story to bed real quick. Still, they tried to use it to bluff leverage. A week later, I get another envelope, this one hand-delivered by Eldon, looking like a butler serving bad news. Inside, a low-ball offer to purchase the disputed parcel at a mutually beneficial price, signed with fake concern and bad math. It wasn't even half of what the land was worth. The tone was syrupy, but the message was clear. Sell now, or we'll make it worse. And I let them think it worked. I called them back, scheduled a meeting, played the part of a nervous, over-leveraged landowner. Marjorie showed up dressed like a real estate villain from a soap opera, pearls, heels, and that smirk that says she thinks she's already won. Eldon stood beside her like a wilted shadow. "We understand this is a frustrating situation," she began, sliding a revised offer across the table. "We'd really hate to see this drag out." I nodded like I was considering it. Meanwhile, the recorder in my watch captured every word, every veiled threat, every little legal landmine they casually tried to plant. She thought she was pushing me towards surrender. What she didn't know was that every syllable she spoke was being wrapped into a tidy audio package labeled Exhibit A, and I couldn't wait to use it. Then came the twist. I got a call from Janice King, the county surveyor who reviewed my documents. She's been around long enough to smell HOA nonsense from a mile away. "Ben," she said, with that matter-of-fact tone government folks use when they're about to drop a bomb, "I pulled the public right-of-ways records. You're clear. That road is still legally active, and your use of it is 100% valid." That single sentence was the confirmation I needed. Not just legal cover, but a bureaucratic sledgehammer. And just in time, because Marjorie's paranoia had finally kicked in. They sent a hired security team to monitor the property. In plain English, HOA rent-a-cops strutting around with clipboards and walkie-talkies like they were guarding a federal facility, and one of them got too curious. They found the partially cleared road and my hidden work area. Instead of backing off, they went rogue. I watched on my security feed as 2 of them cut the padlock on my equipment trailer and started rummaging through tools like raccoons with badges. One of them took a crowbar to a storage bin and left it half-mashed. The whole time? Microphones and cameras were rolling, time-stamped and geotagged. The best part? Brian, their head of security, called Marjorie mid-trespass and said, loud and clear, "Yeah, someone's definitely been building back here. We're gonna need to take this down." Her response wasn't audible, but his face said enough. That was it. The moment the line got crossed from civil dispute to criminal vandalism, she built a house of cards on my land, and I turned on the fan. Now the trap was fully closed. I had her voice, her threats, her offer, and now her team on camera damaging property and trespassing without any legal authority. She tried to steal the land. I just gave her rope to tie the knot. It wasn't about fences anymore. This was about law. And in that moment, Marjorie Langford, the queen of Cedar Hollow, didn't know it yet, but she'd walked out of her kingdom and straight into my evidence fold. And the storm coming next? It wouldn't just shake the gates. It was about to blow the whole HOA wide open. Stick around, because what happens after this? It gets even better. Nothing shakes a queen like her own heir turning against the throne. And the look on Marjorie Langford's face when her son walked into the HOA emergency meeting, you'd think she'd seen a ghost carrying a subpoena. Mel Langford wasn't on the invite list, but he showed up anyway, fresh off a red-eye from Boston with a laptop under one arm and a storm brewing behind his eyes. He didn't come for pleasantries. He came for answers. The other board members, Eldon, Tina, the rest of her whisper circle, tried not to look surprised, but you could smell it. Something had changed in the power dynamic, and for once, Marjorie wasn't the one holding the leash. The clubhouse was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Not a single fork clinked, not a sip of coffee dared. Mel didn't sit. He stood at the end of the long mahogany table like he was delivering a eulogy, which, depending how you see it, he kind of was. "I've reviewed everything," he said, voice calm, not kind. "Emails, property claims, video evidence, and Dad's journals." At that, Marjorie flinched just slightly. It was the kind of flinch that tells you you're not wrong. He kept going. There was no deathbed promise, no secret plan to reclaim that land. He made peace with losing it. But you didn't. No one said a word. It was like watching a well-practiced theater cast forget their lines mid-performance. And Marjorie? She didn't just lose the room, she lost her script. Meanwhile, Ava, cool as a freezer in July, passed out printed statements from the county confirming my public access rights. "The road exists," she said. "It was never closed. My client's construction is legal. Your attempts to block access were not. Simple, clean, devastating." But then came the twist I wasn't expecting. Tina Maws stood up, heels clicking like a countdown. "I have documents too," she said, pulling a flash drive from her purse, internal communications. "Notes about Ben's land, conversations Marjorie didn't want on record." Her voice trembled, but her spine didn't. I didn't know how far it had gone until recently. I stayed quiet too long. It was the HOA equivalent of pulling the fire alarm in the middle of a parade. Marjorie blinked, like someone had just turned off the gravity. There are moments when power doesn't just shift, it crashes. This was one of them. The rest of the board members, previously nodding along with Marjorie's every breath, suddenly couldn't make eye contact. Eldon looked like he wanted to vanish into his blazer. And Marjorie? She sat back, folding her hands like she could somehow pray her way out of a paper trail. She didn't say a word as Tina handed over the flash drive. He didn't argue. Didn't blink. Just sat there, quiet for once, as the narrative she'd written for years dissolved into hard evidence. She wasn't the queen of anything anymore, just the author of a very expensive mistake. That week, the courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, HOA gawkers with thermoses full of drama. The emergency injunction they filed to stop my construction got thrown out like expired yogurt. The judge, who looked like she'd seen every flavor of suburban nonsense, barely let Marjorie's attorney finish his second sentence before shaking her head. "I've read the affidavits, the survey confirmations, and reviewed the video submissions. The plaintiff has every right to access and build on his property. The HOA is ordered to cease all interference immediately." You could have heard a pearl necklace snap in that silence. Marjorie didn't make eye contact. Not with me. Not with her son. Not with anyone. Outside the courthouse, Mel waited for me. I thought he might offer the usual no hard feelings speech, but he didn't. He just said, "I'm sorry. I believed what she told us." I nodded. "I know. She's good at stories, but stories don't hold up in court." He gave a sad smile. "You've got that right." The apology wasn't grand. It was real. And it was enough. The real fireworks came later, at the final HOA board meeting before everything fell apart. I wasn't there, but Tina gave me the play-by-play. Apparently, Marjorie showed up 10 minutes late, stood up without being asked, and gave a full-blown confession wrapped in what she called personal truth. According to Tina, she said, "I did this for Edward. That land was supposed to be his legacy. I was only trying to protect what he wanted." But here's the thing. Legacy isn't about control. It's about character. In that room, it wasn't buying it. Tina said the moment she uttered the word legacy, one of the board members muttered, more like liability. Watching her fall was like watching a swan try to dance in quicksand. Elegant until gravity sets in. No one applauded, no one shouted. Just a long, slow exhale of denial unraveling. She said it was for Edward. She said it was legacy. But the court had already called it what it was. Fraud. And the neighborhood? They were starting to whisper about something they hadn't dared say out loud until now. Maybe the Queen had to go. Within days, board members began stepping down. Tina resigned with a public statement about ethics and reform. Eldon vanished from meetings altogether. Marjorie, stripped of her presidency, stayed inside her house with the shutters drawn and the blinds closed. Like hiding could reverse a lawsuit. But it was too late. The facade had cracked. The throne was empty. And me, I was finally pouring concrete on my foundation while the dust settled around their clubhouse. But the best part wasn't the win. It was knowing the worst of it was behind me. Or so I thought, because just when it seemed like the board had folded and the story had reached its final page, someone new knocked on my door. And they weren't from the HOA. They were from Clearwater Development. And trust me, this ending wasn't an ending at all. Not yet. They blocked my land, so I bought one with a better view. And no HOA within 10 miles, that's not just revenge. That's real estate poetry. After everything, the gate, the lawsuits, the threats, wrapped in garden club language, the dust finally settled. The board was gutted. Marjorie resigned with a statement so vague it could have been copied from a weather app. The settlement, let's just say I won't be needing to finance lumber for the next 5 years. They paid damages, legal fees, and wrote me a check with enough zeros to make a closing agent smile. Ava told me I could drag the whole thing into a courtroom and make it public, but I chose something better. Peace, with a little payday on the side. I was still clearing equipment off the site when Clearwater Development reached out. Turns out the resort plan Marjorie had been hiding behind her garden gloves wasn't dead. It was just waiting. The company's project lead sent me an email that was practically a confession and a love letter rolled into one. "We understand you've had a complicated experience with the HOA. We'd like to discuss a direct offer for your land." Complicated. That's one way to describe organized harassment in Kashmir. They offered 3 times what I paid, plus a bonus for keeping quiet during negotiations. I didn't even blink. Not because I wanted to sell, but because I had already made my decision. That land, it had become the battleground, the story, the scar. And I didn't want to build my piece on top of someone else's wreckage. So I sold it, took their check, shook their hands, and walked away with the same quiet satisfaction as a magician who knows where the rabbit went. I didn't lose the war. I flipped the board. Then I bought a new property an hour north. coastal, private, and more beautiful than anything I'd ever dared to dream of when I started this journey. Ocean view, breeze off the cliffs, and the only HOA nearby was spelled horses, owls, and armadillos. I sat on that porch the first night, watching the sunset with a glass of wine, and laughed to myself. Not bitter laughter, not smugness, just the clean, quiet chuckle of someone who finally got to turn the page. Tina Moss? She turned her flash drive into a mission, started her own real estate firm called Open Deeds Realty, no fine print, no drama. She even called me to say thanks. If it weren't for you, I'd still be selling fairy tales and houses built on paperwork lies. Mel, to his credit, didn't vanish either. He stuck around and joined a coalition working to reform HOA governance at the state level. I told him that sounded like a full-time headache. He smiled and said, "Someone's got to flip the light switch on this system." We both knew he was doing what his mother never could. Turning shame into change. As for Marjorie, I heard she moved to Arizona, somewhere flat, quiet, and as regulation-free as she could manage. Last I checked, she was living in a gated community that someone else ran. Ironic, huh? She built a kingdom of mirrors in Cedar Hollow. All reflections, no foundation. And when I held up a flashlight, it cracked under its own shine. Legacy, it turns out, isn't what people remember you for. It's what they learn from your mistakes. And in that way, maybe she did leave something behind. Just not the thing she wanted. Sometimes the best fences aren't made of wood. They're made of truth and planning. My fence was 5 years of patience, 6 months of setup, and 1 glorious moment of poetic justice. I didn't need to scream to win. I just needed receipts, resolve, and a second entrance no one saw coming. I used to think protecting property was about locks and lines. Now I know. It's about knowing who you are when someone tries to erase you and not letting them. So if you're still here, still listening, still wondering if the little guy can really beat the machine, let me say this: yes. You don't have to play their game. You build your own board, quietly, legally, relentlessly. And when they try to block your view, you go find a better one. And when the sun sets over land that's finally yours, with no one left to harass you or claim what you earned, you'll smile too. Not because you destroyed anyone, but because you didn't let them destroy you. And that's the kind of victory they don't write bylaws for. So that's how I beat the HOA that thought they owned everything but the truth. I didn't shout. I didn't cave. I built. I waited. I watched. And when the time was right, I moved with purpose. And now I wake up to the sound of waves, not warnings. No fake violations, no forged offers. Just a quiet piece of coast, and the kind of silence that feels like freedom. Not because I And if you take nothing else from this story, remember this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's making them irrelevant. This wasn't just a story about land, it was a story about power, pressure, and the quiet dignity of standing your ground. It showed us that bullying in a blazer is still bullying, and when people weaponize rules for personal gain, the right mix of patience, preparation, and principle can flip the script. We learned that legacy isn't inherited, it's built. And sometimes the strongest fences are made of integrity, not lumber. Ben didn't win by rage or revenge. He won by outlasting the lies and outshining the ego. That's the kind of victory anyone can be proud of. If this story hit home, if you've ever dealt with HOA madness, land battles, or just needed a reminder that smart persistence can win, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. We love hearing your stories too. And if you enjoyed this ride packed with truth, twists, and a little poetic justice, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next jaw-dropping episode, because, trust me, the next one, even Marjorie wouldn't see it coming.